human right is developing in Europe. It's called the right to be forgotten, and the principle behind it is that if you make a mistake at some point in your life, maybe it shouldn't dog you for the rest of your life through search engines. That principle is the subject for today's opinion show, where we get together for a discussion with the editorial board of the Plain Dealer and the Northeast Ohio Media Group. I'm Chris Quinn. I'm with opinion director Elizabeth Sullivan and editorial writers Chris Evans, Sharon Broussard, and Ted Dieden. What we're going to talk about very specifically is the principle behind the right to be forgotten. In Europe, the European Union, a judge has ruled that people have that right and has ordered search engines to set up a process by which people can apply to have stories about them taken down out of the search indexes. That would not happen here, probably because of the First Amendment. What we want to talk about, since journalists produce most of the content that we're talking about here, whether we have a responsibility to consider those same rights. I'm going to start with Chris Evans, who has the basic opinion that we've always had and always espoused, that we don't take anything down. Chris, take it away. And
yeah, we don't take anything down. I mean, I think that the code of ethics and the standards of professionalism of our business and the people that I have had the pleasure to work with for more than 3 decades now, we hold ourselves to a very high standard. Truth and accuracy, we're fair. If we make a mistake, we admit it, we correct it. You know, my feeling is that the standards and the ethics that we follow in this business every day preclude us from.
Let me put a little bit of context on it, though, so that people can understand what we're talking about, because what we're talking about here is a little bit based on compassion. I've been using an example of a young man who, when he graduated high school, he and his friends went out and were a little rowdy and broke a small monument. They were caught, they were arrested, they spent 10 days in jail. They had to go and meet with victims of this crime. And 5 years later, as he was getting out of college and seeking to find a job, he had had this case expunged, he had done everything he was required to do, and it was dogging him. And maybe 5 years is too short, maybe 10 years, but basically he's saying, how long do I have to be penalized by this mistake? And we've all received letters like this. It didn't start happening until the internet really developed as this massive archive, but that's what's caused this thinking, is this the right thing to do? And
I mean, I feel for the guy. You know, obviously, for the last 5 years, he hasn't broken any more eagles. You know, that he's obviously learned his lesson. But the fact is that he did, and you know, it was reported accurately at the time, and we're not. In this scenario, we're not dogging him, we're not contacting employers, we're not telling people, hey, you know, be sure to check this out. We did our job, which was to report the news.
Although I do think that, well, I don't agree that there's a basic human right to be forgotten. I think that the European court got that wrong, frankly. And even they said, hey, this is a case-by-case human right. So. Yeah. But I do think in the age of the internet, where, you know, these things can stay around forever if there's sufficient searches involving this person's name, and the search engines are pretty good, that we do have an extra obligation to make sure that there's always context, you know, when people find these stories. So maybe we have to go back and update, you know, stories and say, hey, you know, this person hasn't
He's been clean for 5 years?
Maybe we do that. I don't know. Maybe, but again, you know, that implies that somebody who writes you gets the special treatment, as opposed to the great, vast number of people who have some little niggling thing in their record and they don't think to do that, and they. Well, so there's an equity issue too.
And in that thought, I've got a group of people that are going to start meeting in the Northeast Ohio Media Group newsroom to talk about, could there be, should there be, and could there be an objective set of elements that anybody would have the right to follow to have something like that taken down. And really, this is not preordained. I don't know that we'll do it. It's more just to have this discussion. But what if you said, after 7 years in a minor property crime, you could petition to have that taken down. And if you had had it expunged, and if you'd have no repeated offenses, pretty much, then you could have it taken down. Then it would appeal to everybody. Again, I'm not saying that's what we're going to do.
Taken down from what, Chris? From the newspaper archives?
No, well, we would always have it in
Just
archives,
us.
but you can make
the
things
public-
like that invisible from search engines. The search engines are where this issue exists.
And that's where I've come down on this. I don't think, I'm, like Chris, I don't think we ought to expunge any record from, from our search engines. And actually, if this kid's great-great-great-great-grandfather had stolen an actual eagle in, in 17 or the 1800s, and we had written about it in the Plain Dealer, you could go to the Cleveland Public Library and find that story.
If you knew what date it ran.
Sure, and that's the point. I don't have any problem at all with a law or a process where somebody could petition Google or a search engine to wipe their personal information from that search engine. It's still there in the newspaper archives. It's still there in the criminal records. It's still there in property records and things like that for people who want to take the trouble to search for it. But it's not there for the voyeuristic purposes of somebody who just wants to type in my name and see what they find out. And that to me is where the right to privacy trumps the First Amendment as far as Google is concerned.
One of the points that I've been trying to get into this discussion is the idea that when that memorial is broken, it has huge value to the community as news. Somebody has damaged something that many people care about. But as time ensues, that has less and less news value. It becomes less and less relevant to people. But for the people that are involved in it, that is always relevant if the first thing you find when you type in somebody's name is that they did this 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And it gets to be, how long should somebody have to pay for a mistake that for all other intents and purposes in society has been forgiven and forgotten?
Yeah, and I could argue both sides of this issue because I see both sides of the issue. I mean, I'm thinking about the War Memorial and the kids who climbed up on it at Public Square and damaged it and then had to, do compensation and stuff like that. But on the other hand, I'm just kind of like, this is a new age. I mean, this is an age where you can Google someone's name and, forever you will know that they did something totally stupid that now as grandpa or, as middle-aged, doughy-looking father, that person would ever do. And so it does seem incumbent upon us to at least think about something to do voluntarily, and only if we could figure out, what are the, what would be fair to most people and to our and to journalism.
There was a recent story that's kind of similar where these OSU geology students defaced
oh yeah, that's right,
an ancient painted rock, although the story indicated they probably couldn't see
it was very
on
faint.
it, but nonetheless, they all defaced it. The story I noticed didn't include any of their names. Now, it said that their names weren't available, so that wasn't. But that's an instance where this, in a way, it's causing maybe some censorship up front in order to avoid this.
Like
maybe.
the school did.
We used to have a policy over at the Plain Dealer when we were all there that if a juvenile committed a crime that could be considered a felony if it were an adult court, we'd use their names. And as the permanence of the internet came about, we changed that. Basically, unless they're charged as an adult, we don't use their names, because the whole philosophy behind juvenile court is you're supposed to be able to make a mistake, be corrected, and not have it follow you through life. This is different. We're talking about young adults in this case, but it could be older adults.
Sometimes,
but again, it's following them for the rest of their life.
But what you're suggesting, let me just ask the question, what you're suggesting we might do is expunge or wipe out the people's ability to look at these stories after a certain amount of time, right?
No. Well, look, I'm not proposing anything.
I know,
I'm asking for a discussion. But one way that you could do this is you could take the stories that are on our public blogs, and if you decide they deserve to be out of the public eye, move them to a place where the search engines don't find them. Or you could leave those stories in the public blog, remove the names there, but then leave the intact stories in a place where we have access to them, and
But
people
not the
searching
public?
the archives could find them, but you would not find them through a Google search or a Yahoo search or Bing search.
That goes back to
And
my
part-
original point.
Part
so.
of the underlying issue here, I believe, is that we recognize that there's no way that U.S. courts would recognize this human right to
Right.
be forgotten, and so therefore, you know, maybe the originators of the stories have really are obligated to at least have this kind of discussion that Chris has started.
No, I agree, and I think, you know, it's important to have the discussion, but, you know, as Chris pointed out with juvenile court, I mean, we police ourselves. I mean, we take the role that we play very seriously and talk about the consequences and what is fair and right. And I think the juvenile court thing is a good example of that. I think the way we deal with rape survivors, I believe we are compassionate, and we do police ourselves in a way so that we're being accurate, we're being transparent, we're being fair.
I'd amend that to say that we try to be compassionate and we try to police ourselves, because we do make mistakes and we don't follow up when we should on certain cases.
We don't make mistakes.
I'll just use my, you know, the example I've had when I was reader rep. I got a call from a guy who had been part of, he was in his room, his roommate got arrested for on a drug charge. The story appeared with both their names in it. It turned out, as the case went to trial, that he was blameless, but we didn't follow up on that. We just wrote about the arrest. So when you Google the guy, you know, his kids or employers, anybody else, they'll find that he was part of a drug arrest, but they don't know, unless they follow it up rigorously, they don't know what happened. So that, I mean, those are things that I think my solution about being able to just wipe your name out of Google searches would solve.
Or, you know, like you say, Ted, I mean, we do make mistakes. I mean, that there might be some value in following up on that story, even though it's years later, on how it's dogged this guy, and in fact, he was not found guilty or involved in the...
But that's very
drug-
different. What I'm talking about is people who did do something
Right.
wrong. I mean, they did make the mistake. They did break the law. I mean, this is, Ted's example is somebody's completely innocent. It's unfair that this is dogging him. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But there are other examples. I mean, there's one guy that writes regularly. He was in a room with a friend. They got into an argument. The friend pulled a gun. This guy pulled a gun and shot him and killed him. Was never charged. It was found to be in self-defense. And he wants that removed because he says everybody can see I killed somebody. But he killed somebody. So
Part of the record.
I have a harder time seeing us removing that.
Yeah,
And that's where you get into the whole discussion about arbitrary decisions and trying to come up with some sense of order if you go down this road.
Right.
But it sounds like the general consensus here is that it's not a road you would go down.
No. No.
That would be mine, but just because, exactly what you said, to come up with some order, I think that would be difficult, because I think each of these cases would have to be judged on its own. And then, you know, we all know how, you know, constrained our time is. Who's going to be that person who makes these evaluations? And how fair is that just to allow the person who, you know,
Squeaky
contract
wheel,
the
yeah.
squeaky wheel,
Well,
as
Yeah, but
opposed
you
to...
could add-
If we
Yeah, you could
publicize
tell
that we
people
have this
how to do
process,
it.
that if you feel the need to do this, look, I think this is a movement that will happen with us or without us. I think the longer that this goes on, the more people it affects, there's going to be more of an outcry that, look, this isn't fair. How long do I have to pay for a stupid mistake I made many years ago? And I'm finding myself in a position where I'm having a harder and harder time justifying it. And I've been as adamant as Chris has been. And every time, absolutely not, we never take it down, we never take it down.
But I think it's important to have that discussion and have the ongoing discussion and tweak, as with juvenile court, you know, tweak our ethics, or not tweak them, but, you know, change them. I mean, that we look at this as a kind of it's amorphous, it's ever changing. But I still think that with the First Amendment and freedom of the press, I mean, there is an obligation that we have, and we have to live up to that obligation in a professional and ethical and fair and compassionate way. And I think having these kinds of discussions, you know, helps us define, you know, where are we going to draw these lines.
One of the reasons we're having this discussion today is because we very much want to hear from you. I wrote a column about this a few weeks ago and did hear from people very strongly on both sides. If we are thinking about going down this road, what would your suggestions be for how we do that? Or if you think it's a bad road to go down, we'd like to hear that too. Please leave your thoughts where you find the show. We'll see you next time on The Opinion Show.